Yeah, hi and welcome everybody to the Permaculture Design Course. This is the first topic. You see we have around about 20 topics and we will go through each one of them through the whole course. Each lecture basically has a specific topic. We go through a couple of introductory classes, then we go through certain topics like soil and water. Then we have an extra session on design processes. We will see that has a special weight in the whole course, and then at the end we'll have more topics, and then we will have our final design. But that's something we will look on in detail when we look a bit on the how's the course set up. First, I would like to show you the agenda of the first topic. We will have a little who is who. I will present myself real quick. I'll have a word on who's on board too as other tutors and who's the final examiner of you guys. Then I would like to show you the Moodle a little bit, or mention it, and then when there's more questions we can go on the tutoring on that specifically. Then as a first topic we will show you a little bit on the history of permaculture, where is it coming from and what does the term actually stand for and what times was it coined. That plays a specific role when you then also read the books of Bill Mollison and David Holmgren, because they were basically founding so-called permaculture during the peak oil times. So their whole preoccupation basically was how to get rid of fossil fuels, something which nowadays is still a problem. Anyways, that was basically the historical context. Then we will go into some current issues that we have really to be facing, so we know why actually we're doing permaculture. I mean, most of you guys will actually know why you are doing it, but all of us have their own reasons for sure. But there are certainly some general topics and trends that we cannot look away, and we need to face them. Then after that, we might be coming out a little bit sad, and we want to give you obviously the light at the end of the tunnel, which will be permaculture. Permaculture for me is basically the toolkit that can help us save the planet and ourselves, basically as a human race. We will go into depth then what the definitions could be, and we'll see that there's certain ranges of possible definitions that we can look at. We will have a couple then of examples that show us what permaculture looks like in application, from typical farming to housing to other examples of how we associate plants and things like that. Then we will show you what is the difference between organic farming and permaculture. Many people think that's the same, but it's not. It has obviously certain elements in common, and permaculture without organic farming is not possible, but organic farming without permaculture is possible. So we see that one thing is not the other. Then we look at the Permaculture Flower, which is also part of the first little booklet that you have available also on the Moodle platform, Permaculture Essence. This is basically the book for the first couple of lectures, and then you also will have the other study book. Here we look specifically at the so-called Permaculture Flower. That's an image with all kinds of associations we might have with the term permaculture, and I'm sure you will identify with one or the other, and that's basically why we look at it, and you can see how many spheres are there within permaculture. We look at specific tools already at the beginning in this section. Critical needs analysis is a very important thing to look at, especially in the beginning of the permaculture process of designing. When you look at the needs of each agent or each user basically of the design, you need to ask what are the critical needs. There's certain needs that we all need, like water and food, but there's other needs that might be critical for each one of us. One might need more medicine, or one might need more other things. And at the end, we always have next steps, and we always point out what are the exercises, and you will find exercises also on the Moodle platform. They're always written the same way as the lecture. So this is topic 1.1. So you will have homework 1.1. So it's quite hard to mistake which homework is to do for each topic, and you will see that each topic has a couple of tasks that you have to hand in, and there's some field work sometimes involved. Sometimes it's just a reflection of the content that we're giving you, and those will be corrected by your tutor. He or she will give you feedback, and that's basically one of the main ingredients of how you can learn the permaculture design in the online course. And we combine this with videos and live tutorials, as you will learn along the way. And as a top, you have a study book to also study offline, which I think is really important, to sit at a nice porch under a tree, looking at a garden maybe, and reading a book completely offline. I think that's highly valuable. Yeah, again, I would like to introduce myself. My name is Philip Schuster. I'm a PhD in economics. That's my background from school, so to say. Yeah, I studied economics. Started around 2000, but before already I was really into sustainability. At high school, one of my teachers, he gave me a book, was called Sustainable Germany, within the 90s already, envisioning solar panels on the rooftops and wind turbines everywhere. Why was that such a topic where I'm coming from? I was born in a city where there's coal mining, and during the 80s there was already the big discussion about fossil fuels and coal mining, if it's sustainable and can we live like that any longer. Yeah, and I was really inspired by my teacher, and he gave me this book basically, and from then on I was really inspired of being more sustainable and living a healthier life. And then I started studying, I started traveling. I was really interested in seeing the world, and I saw a lot of things that I didn't like, and that made me more motivated to change something. After a while, I still was studying. I finished my master's in economics, then I started my PhD. But I was really getting fed up with the economic system and all these things we are seeing nowadays. And then I was really thinking I want to leave the system. Just started with permaculture. I found out about permaculture over 10 years ago. And I was so fascinated by that. I said, I want to just do that. I left my job, went to Spain, took my surfboard, and was just looking to find a place to settle down and start a permaculture business, basically. Well, the journey somehow ended up not doing a permaculture hostel, but as you can see, still fully involved in permaculture and still in Spain and still loving it. So this is a bit about myself. We have two more teachers here on board. You will get to know them in detail. One is Miguel. Miguel will be your personal tutor. And we have Alex, who's the examiner at the end, who will also be the one that certifies you. And we all basically work together and supervise you during the whole course. So we will also meet you soon. So this is just us and me specifically today. Just a quick heads up on what you can expect from the online platforms. So this is our online campus you see here on the left. Where you get access to the virtual classroom, which is the Zoom room. Basically, you will have a link and you can meet every week if you wish. In the live sessions, we will go through all the topics and then start over again. So that makes it for us possible to accommodate that you start whenever you want, from wherever you want. We make it possible for people to be having a working life and at the same time be able to go to class. Some go only to the recordings, some will be there in live, and that allows us to cater to more or less everybody. So you have two possibilities to access your course. Basically, you can either go directly to the moodle.seedsforsustainability.com link, or you go to the website and go to the login eCampus, and this should lead you, since you're only enrolled in permaculture course, then that should lead you to the permaculture design course directly. If you enroll in more than one course, you will be able to go into different courses, of course. So there you will have always the general part with the topics, the itinerary of the course, and then you also have all the access links you need. You have some forums where you can present yourself, you can also post questions, and most importantly, you have all the materials of the course over time available. We will always open a topic for you, and when you go through the course after the while, you will have them all available, and this course stays available for you for minimum 1 year. So you will have plenty of time to study, go back to watch the videos, go back to see the exercises, commentaries, etc. So hopefully full flexibility for you and commodity. That's basically what we try to achieve. So when you have more questions on the technical aspects, just write us a message and or ask us directly, and we can clarify everything. So now we would like to give you a little introduction into the history of permaculture and look at the current context, see also the context where permaculture was founded, and now look at the current situation. So here you see the two famous guys from Australia. One is David Holmgren and one is Bill Mollison. They are called the founding fathers of permaculture. At the end of the 1970s, they basically coined the term for the first time. They mentioned the word permaculture, and no one really knew what it meant. The idea was to create permanent cultures or permanent agriculture. So the history of permaculture is basically founded in agriculture, but it doesn't stay there. So it's not only applicable to agriculture, it goes far more. So when we think of permanent cultures, we can go into everything: society, families, companies. Companies have a culture. Why not design companies with permaculture? No problem. All is possible. So what was the time basically when they mentioned permaculture for the first time? So what were the main occupations and worries? They were facing peak oil, which we're not even sure if we reach peak oil yet, because they were thinking of peak oil back in the day, so that we reached point of highest extraction level of oil. By then extraction will become less. But it turns out that they found new oil every now and then, and peak oil probably is soon, but not 100% reached yet. Now, since the Arctic is even melting down, now they're even thinking of extracting petrol or crude oil from there. So unfortunately, the story is not over yet. Yet the world is starting to think differently, trying to go out of fossil fuels more towards renewable energy. And nowadays, obviously, with climate change and other environmental problems, it's hard to look away. So this was the time when they founded basically permaculture. So since their main concern was oil, their main techniques were done or were developed to avoid use of energy and fossil fuels. So when you read, for example, Bill Mollison's manual, he always comes up with energy. He always talks about how much you use in certain resources for traditional agriculture and compares this to better methods. So that's a bit of their mindset. And it's not that they really found something new. Permaculture is more like looking at best practice all over the world, all over the history of human mankind, and find best practice. They went to visit, they went to research Maya, Inca, Aztecan techniques, Polynesian, even Canary Islands. Bill Mollison came to visit Canary Islands, where I'm living, and it's interesting how they were researching traditional agriculture methods done for generations, because back in the days people didn't have all this machinery, tractors running on petrol, everything industrial, mechanical. It was small scale farming, or at least with human labor. Unfortunately, many places in the world surely with slavery. Yet in other cultures which were not the European, they had much different practices, such as, for example, planting food inside of the forest. That's where the idea of a food forest came up. Even there's theories saying that part of the Amazon, where there's food growing, has been artificially so-called established. It's quite interesting to see how we can learn from ancient cultures. There's so much knowledge that we can build on. It's incredible, and that's what I find most amazing about permaculture, that it's really not inventing anything new. It's just putting everything nicely in a really smart way together, so to say, making your toolkit ready, your toolbox ready, putting in tools that fit best for certain situations. And that's for me what permaculture is. We have certain problems, and like Phil Morrison always liked to say, the problem is a solution. So within the problem, we will find the solution, and we should look on the thing that is a solution and not a problem. So this is also a positive mindset. So when we then see problems, we have all the solutions in the permaculture kit available, and it's for us just to make a smart design to solve it. So now let's dive a little bit into a little bit more depressing part of this lecture, where we have to look at the current problems. One of the current problems surely is plastic and pollution. Here we see a picture on the right side with all kinds of trash coming up on shore for many reasons. Some societies, they don't have a proper trash system, collecting system of trash, or even sewage. So in many places of the world, sewage is going directly into the sea. One of the biggest problems we face as humans nowadays is definitely the plastic problem, which especially in the oceans is turning into the problem of microplastics. So from there they go into our food chains. And now if we would analyze, or if we were to analyze our genetics, our cells, I'm sure many of us, surely me included, we would find plastic in our cells, which is quite scary because we also don't really know yet what are the medical implications of that. What kind of health issues can that cause? Surely the endocrine system is affected. It could cause cancer, but we don't know so much more. In any case, we know it's not good. Plastic never disappears. Even if you would leave it 500 years in a landfill, it just breaks down, but it never decomposes. So it's on one hand, it's good because it's one of the most resisting materials we can have, and that's also the downside. It never breaks down. So we see here the problem, and I don't know, surely some of you have seen famous posts of plastic cups from the 1970s that are still there. 50 years, they found on the beach. Sometimes really sad what we see. And in many places of the world, every day it looks like that. And many times it's even our trash from currents are just brought somewhere else, the so-called downstream costs. Like having a factory on top of the river, you put everything into the river and the river brings it down, spills it into the ocean, and out of sight, out of mind. So this is one of the current problems we see. Another huge problem certainly is deforestation, and especially deforestation of primary forests. Primary forests have one of the highest biodiversity we can think of, one of the most productive systems we can think of. They fulfill many roles in the global ecosystem called the planet, such as being the lungs, if you want to say so, or the livers, or whatever part of the body it is. Actually, it fulfills many roles, and we need forests more than ever. The sad part about it is that it once deforested the ecosystem, and certain amount is only left of the virgin forest. It's hard to grow it back. If the forest still has the large capacity of healing, especially primary forests, if you deforest part of it in fast time, it can recuperate. But we now have achieved a certain level where the capacity of those primary forests has decreased so much that even the reviving capacity is getting lost more and more. So just for you to have a figure, which is really sad to see, in 2018, we see that about 3.6 million hectares of primary tropical forest disappeared. That's a lot of wood. And this, when we then think of all the wildfires that we currently see, even in 2019, the Amazon Ourselves, we have been evacuated too in 2018 from wildfires we had here. I think at the moment it's Kilimanjaro, Colorado is on fire, Australia was on fire. There's bushfires all around the world, and what we have at the moment is COVID-19 situation. Many people also say one of the reasons we have the problem of infirmities around the world is because of deforestation. There's certain bacteria and viruses inside of these ecosystems, and if we destroy them, also the natural predators and the equilibrium basically of the ecosystem breaks down, and then those pathogens like COVID can escape, so to say, and cause lots of damage. And the WWF or Greenpeace at the moment are campaigning hard for the fighting against the loss of biodiversity. And now the upside of COVID is now they have more people listening. Yes, also very famous picture has been around the last couple of years in many media. Yeah, the poor ice bear on his ice, driving away, floating away basically. Here we talk about the 6th great extinction. Like you can imagine, there was 5 before. So now we see that right now, currently under the risk of extinction, we have approximately 5,200 species. And that is a lot of species at the moment. Yeah, at the risk of being extinct. This means that this would be 11% of all birds, 20% of all reptiles, 34% of all fish, and 25% of all amphibians and mammals. That's a lot of fauna that would get lost. And that's why we talk about the 6th great extinction. And one thing that is, there's 2 basic characteristics that can distinguish this extinction from others. First, it's caused by humans, which there's no further cases known. And second, it happens at such a fast rate, never experienced before. According to the source, further extensions back in the days were developed over many years, and not in such a short time span. So this is what should also worry us. The next point that we really have to focus on, and well, soil is one of the most discussed topics for sure in permaculture, which is the loss of cultivable soil, the ground where we actually can cultivate vegetables, or any kind of plants. What you see here on the right hand side basically is the opposite of what it looks like to have a good soil. Here we basically see some brick-like, they call it also hard pan soil. Not sure what the components are. It looks like lots of clay, but there's definitely no more humus layer left, and looks more like a desert than any kind of living system. But we will go into the soil topic much more in detail during the whole course. We will see that one of the main objectives of permaculture basically is to improve soil for productivity and for many reasons, also to retain water in a better way. Nowadays, for me, there's a much bigger reason why we should improve our soils, which is climate change. Maybe many of you don't know that good soil can sequester CO2 in a much more efficient way than a tree, because a tree can obviously sequester CO2 only to a level that the soil where the tree is planted allows that. Because where's the CO2 going that the tree is sequestering? Of course, into the producing biomass by photosynthesis, but also it puts it into the soil. And good soil by itself can sequester lots of CO2. So 2 good strategies for climate change: improve the soil, plant trees, and planting trees improves the soil. So it's a win-win situation. So there we are, looking for hope, and permaculture for sure has, like I said, the toolkit necessary to give us hope, and we can certainly rely on many techniques that help us design a more resilient and safe future. So now let's look into a bit more detail what is permaculture? Yeah, we now got some idea of what permaculture means. We heard some of the history, but we'll go much more into detail. So let's look at the first definition. Permaculture uses a set of principles and practices to design sustainable human settlements. One interesting aspect of this definition, for sure, is that it includes the human being. Yeah, in many approaches, or many people consider the human being as the virus. Now, when we talked about COVID, people were saying, we are the virus. Well, maybe in a certain way, could think of that. I personally have a different point of view, but I understand when people say that. And this is one of the biggest challenges. Now, imagine you creating a bioreserve or natural reservoir, natural park. It's not such a big, well, it is a big deal and it's definitely complex, but then including the human being would even be more complex because most of our activities in a conventional way are pretty harming. So from that point of view, it's one of the biggest challenges. So now let's look at the next one. Permaculture began then as a set of tools for designing landscapes that follow the model of nature, but that include humans. Again, stressing the fact that human beings are included. Now we're designing landscapes. We are intervening by using a set of tools. So this is for me here the most striking point. However, turns out that the principles of permaculture have an impressive reach far beyond the origins of permaculture and agriculture. Permaculture has been used to design buildings, energy systems, and wastewater, towns, and even fewer tangible structures such as school curricula, businesses, community groups, and decision-making processes. You will see in the course also that we, at the end of the course, will have some extra sessions on especially that part, decision-making processes, group facilitation work. We talk about sociocracy. Maybe you've heard about that. Very effective system to organize groups and make decision-making in a, well, not democratic way. We call it a sociocratic way. There's slight but very important differences. So stay tuned for that. But thinking of designing communities, thinking maybe of designing eco-villages, thinking about designing sustainable future cities. How are we to do that if we're not able to work in a community together, make decisions together, and bottom up, not only from politicians that don't represent us? No? So this is a very important aspect as well. So if this still seems a bit theoretical, possible, here's a more realistic definition of permaculture. If we think of practices like organic farming, recycling, natural building, renewable energy, and even consensus decision making and social justice efforts as tools for sustainability, then permaculture is a toolbox that helps us to organize and decide when and how to use these tools. Permaculture is not a discipline in itself, but a design approach based on the connection of different disciplines, strategies, and techniques. I think with this definition, it becomes much clearer what we can think of when we mention permaculture. What distinguishes permaculture from other approaches like regenerative agriculture or organic agriculture, we use certain ethics and principles. We will learn about those principles in the next class. But to start with, we look at the ethics of permaculture to show also what is our philosophy as designers, as landscape artists, as self-sufficient managers. We want to take care of people, we want to have a fair share, and we want to take care of Earth. So all those aspects are not for granted, no, not necessarily appearing that way in modern society. People care, so that means in our designs we have to be focused on human needs to cover them and have a peaceful togetherness between people and to take care of each other. And the concept of caring includes so many aspects like emotional, social, and all these things that human beings need to be happy. Fair share, on the one hand, means that we share our resources, we share our time, our tools, our friends, our food, but also means that we share with other living beings. We share the planet with the flowers, we share the planet with the plants, we share the planet with the animals. So we might want to leave them a share too. Yeah, thinking of a tree, you might want to leave some fruits for the animals, or grow food for your animals, or just leave a piece of land untouched, just so nature can have it. Just for us to stay humble and say, hey, I'm not the owner of everything. Let nature have part too. You can interpret that in any kind of way. The important thing is that sharing is caring, as you want to say so. So people care, fair share, they belong together. And earth care is also really important. Just the fact that we talk about earth and the ground we cultivate in, we call it soil and not dirt. In many places in the world, we call soil dirt. And for me, that's one of the biggest depreciations we can do. But soil is gold. It's not dirt. You might get dirty putting your hands in there, but you will get healthy. So treating it as dirt means like undervalue, no? So just the fact that we first call it differently already gives a whole different connotation. And caring about the soil, caring about the planet, it's a whole different approach than exploiting it. Agriculture exploits. We have machinery, we exploit. We move the soil, we extract resources, we maximize outputs. That's exploitation. Taking care of Earth is a different approach. It's much more softer, more friendly, and also thinking about the needs of nature. And we need to think about what is the need of the soil. What does a healthy soil need? What does a healthy pond need? What does a healthy chicken need? Huh? Traditional agriculture thinks, how can I get the chicken to lay maximum amount of eggs in the shortest time? That's not thinking about the needs of the chicken when it's going to be happy. It's just thinking about money and maximum output and production. Also, of course, to feed the people. But if we think about this whole discussion about, we have to feed the planet. We can't go on small scale agriculture. Everything has to be big scale. How are you going to feed the masses? I tell you something. 2/3 of all food that is produced in Europe and in the States is thrown away. So, what are we talking about here? Different approach. Let's go into some examples to illustrate much easier certain aspects of what permaculture is. And what we see here on the first picture is a concept super typical for permaculture. It's the idea of zoning, making zones. Here we see we have zone 1, zone 2, zone 3, zone 4, maybe zone 5. Zone 5 would be the wilderness. So what does a zone determine? Why do we separate in zones? Here, we try to be as energy efficient as possible, which means most intensive and hard work and frequent work activities are based as close as possible to the center of your design, which in general should be the house. So the house is zone 0, basically, ground 0, and then everything around the house is basically zone 1. We visited daily, various times. We used the garden beds, a lot of times, vegetable gardens, herb gardens, social areas, etc. We go further, maybe we have chickens, other animals that we don't have to go 5 times a day, 3 times a day. Maybe just once, check for the eggs, have some cleaning, that's it. Other trees, we don't have to take care of them every day. But maybe the vegetable garden, we have to water every day. In summertime, we have to weed it, maybe fertilize it or apply some compost, harvest, even if it's just for cooking, maybe it's 3 times a day. But the further we go out, the less intense gets the usage. So maybe we introduce some more wooden species, we try to plant some more forest elements, and maybe introduce some livestock into these forest systems. And the further we go, the less intense will it get until the zone 5, where I said it's called the wilderness, where obviously we're not doing anything. The wilderness could also be outside of your property, so not every property has to have all these zones, but the idea of zoning is a very helpful tool to already make a design much more efficient than the general designs. Here on the left side, on the right side, sorry, you see the permaculture chicken coop, which is also quite different from chicken factories, of course, and traditional chicken coops as well. So what we see here is already the principle of multifunctionality, storing and catching energy, retroalimentation, etc. So there's so many principles that work in this one image. For example, we take into account the angle of sunlight in summer, in winter, which areas are shaded in winter, which have light in winter. Because some areas that maybe have shade in summer because the sun is high, maybe are lighted in winter because the sun is low and it can penetrate through certain branches, etc. And there's maybe certain areas where in the winter you have more sun, and in others the other way around. Here, for example, we also see that the rooftop has planted some leaves, maybe even some food, so this gives some extra insulation, it's heat protection, cold protection, maybe it's providing even food for the chickens. We see also the rooftop is catching water, which goes into a tank. This tank at the same time provides water for the chickens. Chickens you can grow inside the chicken coop when it's separated. Maybe use it as a greenhouse, which could be heating up in winter. And all of a sudden you have more or less self-sustaining elements, but just smartly combining certain things. Completely different from a traditional egg. Oops. Another useful example to illustrate what is permaculture are the 3 sisters. Again, ancient method from Latin America. Also explains those species, because corn is not necessarily from Europe. It's basically imported too, or at least the genetics are from somewhere else. Now we can grow it everywhere, but originally it's from a different hemisphere. So the 3 sisters illustrate us what we mean by plant associations or plant gilding. We know from science and from experience that plants, they interact. Even there's recent research showing that they talk to each other, so quote. They send certain substances to each other towards the roots. It's like the internet of the trees in the forest, really. And when there's like an illness attacking one tree on the borders, basically, other trees already are warned, so to say, and sometimes really even develop some kind of, no, I don't want to call it vaccines, but some kind of mechanisms to protect themselves. That's one aspect, but more general, plants, they can either help each other or be neutral to each other, or basically impede each other. The 3 sisters are a really good example of how plants can mutually benefit each other and how in a small space you can maximize output by combining plants. Here we see corn, beans, and squash. So the corn is fast growing, grows tall, gives a certain structure. The beans, they like to wine, and they wine up the corn. So the structure for the beans is provided by the corn. The beans, in turn, are so-called nitrogen fixes. So on the roots, they develop certain kind of fungi that then captures nitrogen, which we need as fertilizers for trees. It's one of the 3 main ingredients of nutrients for plants. So the beans help the corn and the squash at the same time. The squash in place has really big leaves, as we can also see here on this picture. They're pretty low to the bottom, so they stop evaporation in a certain way. They provide shade for the ground, cools it down, water evaporation, better microclimate. So again, mutual beneficial relationship between the elements. And that's basically what permaculture is also about, how to create mutual connections beneficial for the elements in place. Let's look again at the chicken and egg that comes out of the production process. Here on the left side, we see the conventional production of an egg. That's why here we see it, no? An industrial egg. Quality, parenthesis, huh? This is Bill Mollison, 1980s. So we see before the egg actually is produced, we see there's lots of extraction of iron, coal, maybe oil drilling, fishing. Then we have factories, more production processes, more resources go in there, more energy, chemicals. From that, we maybe have biocides, fertilizers, plastics, then more fossil fuels to farm those crops, harvest them, bring them into silos, transport them, even more, bring them to the pellet mill, to then finally end up to a chicken which lives in the factory, maybe doesn't see the sunlight, not at all, maybe has an artificial lamp so it can lay 2 eggs a day, has lots of hormones to develop big breasts, to be then eaten up, sad stories, just so that we can have a cheap egg at the end. But quality and health aspects and environmental aspects not considered. On the other hand, this is a harmony of permaculture chicken coop. Again, we see different elements in place. We see also some space where maybe the chickens can free roam. They scratch the ground, they eat from the ground, they fertilize the ground. Things from the trees fall on the ground, they eat them too. Rainwater catching, happy chickens. Again, we have a little bit of extraction resources, of course, maybe for the aluminium panels for the rooftop. There's some mining, some processing too, but that's it. It's maybe 0 kilometers from farm to my plate. Obviously, not all of us maybe have the luxury to have that, but just knowing that we grow things in a different way, chickens are happy, earth is happy, and people are happy. Another example of permaculture is this: chaos, maybe for one eye, harmony and beauty for another. It's not the typical English garden where you have the nice mown lawns and everything is neatly organized in lines, nicely cut, and no weeds around, and everything is clean. The ground is clean. Here we see the whole ground is covered with weeds or grasses or other things, with lots of flowers, different heights. It looks chaotic, but in a way it's also beauty and equilibrium, no? Peace. Here we see a possible design. We see the houses in the middle, zone 0, zone 1. We have intensive work around, which is typical for zone 1, and many different elements, lots of things integrated and not segregated, which is another important principle. So this is a picture we will look at quite a lot through the first lectures, and we will have some exercises on this, so don't worry about it, we will see it again later. This is a really nice example of a desert house design. We will learn certain climates and how design has to change according to climate. Obviously, a house in the tropics is different from a house in the desert, different from a house in Germany, in the cold, in the UK, and so on. Here, that's an example of a desert house covered by earth, almost underground. Half of the house is under an earth berm, basically, and that already cools down the house, creates a certain climate. We have ventilation system, natural, maybe even with some tunnels, pipes that provide some extra aeration. We see also here rooftop is cultivated. We have vines, also again to shade and to produce more. So this is a quite nice example. We also have trees around the house close by to give extra shade. So the objective of cooling the house, as we see, is done by many elements. Yeah? So this is another important element of permaculture called redundancy, which in science, when we write an article, we want to avoid, to not say anything more than necessary. Permaculture is the other way around. We want to create redundancy, which means if we have something to get done, try to get it done in many ways. Because if one fails, maybe the others can equilibrate. So here the purpose of cooling is done maybe by shading of the trees, shading of the vines, ventilation, the earth, the covering of the rooftop. So 4 or 5 things already done to provide the function of cooling. Okay. Here we have an example of a so-called sun trap, more common obviously in cold areas. We see that there's a kind of a windbreak built around or planted around the house. This would be the north side where the cool winds are coming from, so the cool winds are blocked off from the trees. The sun-facing side is open with lower plantations going higher towards the sun, which also increases the capture of sunlight and increases the capture of heat. So this is why it's called a sun trap, because the heat is trapped inside this inverse U basically. So again, we have many functions to then fulfill the need of heating. Here you have a little house, more like a shed or whatever it is, who lives there. But it's combined with a little glass house, another heating element. It's planted or built inside of a sun trap. So in this case, we see how the design changes with climate and how the smart combination of certain elements can provide a good outcome. Very important in permaculture also are so-called food forests. Typical for zone 3 in general. The idea is to create forest systems that are lower in maintenance and high in yield. We have high diversity and high resilience. We generally have certain layers, up to 7 or more, made from maybe vines, ground cover, understory, midstory, and overstory, maybe some swaling to catch some extra rainwater. But we certainly have different layers, which allows better capturing of sunlight. We then also have different length of roots. So the longest roots will get the deepest water, suck it up. Then the mid-long roots will then get it, and so on and so on. So by having longer, different lengths of roots, we already have a better watering system in place. So food forests not just create high yield, they recuperate soil and they catch lots of energies, whether it's sun energy or wind energy or water. Also important to know for us, food chains, and we will talk about that in depth in the next session when we have a little introduction into ecology. But we see this so-called food pyramid with us humans on top. That can be discussed if that's the right representation, but still nice to illustrate. We see then we have different life going on. We have bigger animals on the same level more or less like us, but then we have insects and other arthropods. We have plants and soil life. This is a picture for rich soil, and this is a picture for really poor soil, where we might have the same living beings, but in a much less amount, much less diversity, but we have the same components. Now we have the vertebrates, the insects, the plants, and the soil life, but with less diversity, less amount. Here on the right side, we see another important principle that we always have to know, that nothing is lost in nature. Everything breaks down, and there's always someone that uses up what you have left. Whether it's the food that then breaks down by bacteria or fungi or microbes, and then that gives food for bigger insects, then again for bigger insects, then maybe for animals, those animals for us, and the story starts all over again. So this whole process of producing, decomposing, and consuming is essential for us. And that's also when we think of feeding the plants, what we really want to do is feeding the microbes or the microorganisms or the soil, not the plants. The plants then feed from the soil. We don't directly feed plants unless we want to do conventional agriculture. Another nice example is, maybe you've heard about Hügelkultur. That was coined first by a guy called Sepp Holzer from Austria. The idea is to make raised beds, and inside of these raised beds you put lots of wooden organic material that stores lots of humidity and long time decomposing processes. And the further you go up, the easier decomposable materials you would use. Then on top you have a nice humus layer that allows you to cultivate. One advantage of this so-called Hügelkultur is, on the one hand, it's a nice water efficient use of resources due to the materials inside of the raised bed, and on top the decomposing inside also provides lots of nutrients. So this already is like a living substance inside of this bed. On top you can cultivate, and the other advantage is also that it increases the surface of cultivation. If you look on the right hand side, it could even be nicely used for, let's say, more generational farming, where even older people could easily farm without bending down, and they can easily harvest and cultivate those beds from the top. The other effect is also that you really maximize the space that the beds have. And when you only would cultivate on this flat area, so this is the whole area you can cultivate. But then if you look at this diagonal and this diagonal, the whole surface becomes all of a sudden so much bigger. It looks almost like double the size of what you can cultivate. So again, very efficient use of your resources. Another example of permaculture is ponds and the interaction of animals and plants around the ponds. Again, we have many purposes to be fulfilled here. Let's say, for example, feeding the plants, feeding the animals, and having the water in a good quality. So we want to design the elements so all these needs are met. Let's say aeration of water, okay, needs to be enough wind or trees, or if not, maybe jet pump to insert extra oxygen. Food for the plants could come from stuff that falls down from trees, or maybe even something that comes out of the duck. All the extracts, the excrements, all the manure slowly goes down, and some fish even eat of it, prawns eat it, plants eat it. So depending on how we design our ponds and water systems, that can be fully self-sustaining and have incredible high outputs. So now we have seen a couple of examples of permaculture. So now let's do a little comparison. What is the difference between organic farming and permaculture? Well, here we see a couple of differences. One difference would be that here everything is planted in rows, and the soil is open, nicely clean and neat. We see lots of resources here that are brought into the system from the outside, most likely purchased from an industrial store. Then we see here a shovel, which means somebody's working the soil. We see trees, they all look pretty much the same height, same fruit, and that's it. We don't see animals, we don't see any human being. Here, on the other side, we see the human being integrated. We saw that's one of the important aspects. We see different types of trees, we see birds, we see maybe fruit trees, bananas, apples, pears, a bit of everything. We see animals integrated, but we see also fences creating edges. We see diversity, almost everything is covered here from the cultivated land. Walkways, we don't know whether it's sand, maybe it's also mulched, we don't know. In any case, we see No straight lines. We see flowers integrated into the production beds, animals roaming around. Lots of integration, diversity. We don't see any resources brought into the system. There's no sacks, there's no shovel, which also means we don't work the soil. We let the soil work itself, or the insects and all our helpers, the critters, they do the job for us. So good soil doesn't need a shovel. So like you have maybe on your balcony, you have some plants with nice, black, soft soil. That's the kind of soil we want like to have everywhere. I mean, there's certain trees that like more sandy soils or more clay soils. Okay, but in general, we would like to have lots of humus-rich soil everywhere for capturing water, capturing CO2, more microorganisms, more health, more stability, more production. So now, this is the famous permaculture flower. I would not like to go here into depth because you will see one of your exercises at the end will be to look at it a bit more in depth. So we don't have to do that now. You will see lots of things associated already with permaculture, from land tenure and community to built environment, tools, culture, and even spiritual well-being. We see lots of spheres covered in permaculture. So I don't want to go in there. For you, it's good to look at it. In the book, we have some text on it, and one of the examples will be to pick one aspect and describe a little bit what you understand. Another interesting analysis we have to have, especially in the beginning of our research process, what are the needs, and, what are our observations on people living or wanting to live where we are designing. So we look at the critical needs. So obviously, water, sunlight, those are clear. Money might be another critical need. Medicine, here we have the aloe vera leaf, very important medicine. If you don't know anything about aloe vera medicine, make sure you look it up. It's amazing what this plant can do. They call it a pharmacy in a leaf. So make sure you have a pharmacy in your leaf wherever you live. You can grow them inside the house too, so it's possible. Food, obviously, critical need. Drinking, also critical need. And then from there on, we might ask ourselves, do we have additional critical needs? Maybe you need social life. We have seen that in COVID. Older people, if they don't have social life, they might die of depression and not of COVID. We see these kind of things. Maybe we have protection. Everybody has their critical needs, and we need to know them in order to have an optimal design. This brings us to the famous chicken in permaculture when we talk about the element analysis, basically. What that means is that we analyze all the elements in our design according to certain categories, which here will be needs, and then products, behaviors, and intrinsic characteristics. And with those categories, you can basically analyze or should analyze all elements in or main elements in your design. The chicken, for example, needs shelter, grid, dust, water, air, food, also other chickens. But also it produces eggs, meat, feather, manure, methane, CO2, behaviors, it scratches, it forages, it flies, it fights. And what's intrinsic? Maybe the breeding characteristic, the color, climate tolerance, breed-specific behavior. So we see all these aspects are really important, and when we now think of mutual beneficial relationships between elements, what would be the ideal? That the needs of one element are covered by the output of another. Like we've seen before in the chicken coop, the need for food of the chickens was maybe provided by their own chicken coop. Or we saw the housing, the cooling, all those needs of cooling was tried to provide by other elements. Instead of buying an air conditioner, turning it on, and that's it. Which produces lots of CO2, uses lots of energy, and costs lots of money. So this is something we will practice during the course extensively, because we need to know our resources, how we can combine the elements and create beneficial relationships between them. So this brings me now to the conclusion of the first topic. I hope you enjoyed it. It was just the first introduction. You will see we have lots of materials coming up. We will have similar content now also in the live tutorial. So don't be surprised if in the live tutorials you will see similar content, but we will have some more interactive elements, of course, which wouldn't make any sense if I recorded them. Like, hey, let's have a Q&A round now. No one's there. Not fun. So doesn't make so much sense. So we will have also tutorials live and record them too. So as a homework for the first topic, so HW11 will be read the booklet, read the first chapter. The booklet is also on the platform. Then you will see the graphic of the Permaculture Flower, and please tell us which ones of the terms do you know. Minimum 3, maximum 5. Describe what you associate with each one. Then provide yourself with your own definition of permaculture. Give a description in your own words. Helps to recuperate a bit the content, refresh it, and have clear understanding of what you're doing. Next thing, where do you identify areas in your life where you already apply certain permaculture techniques in your life and where you would like to apply them more? Tell us. So I hope the exercises are clear. Please let us know, or your personal tutor. If there's any doubts, you will hand them in via email to your tutor, and he will give you the corrections on them. And if there's maybe you will have to alter your answers maybe sometimes, or revise and resubmit, but that's a rare case. But if we see some severe flaws, I don't want to call them, but let's say potential to improve, then we will give you, we will insist in handing it in again and having done the corrections. Otherwise, the learning effect is not as how we want it. So yeah, that's basically how this works. I hope everything is clear. Please let us know if it's not. In that case, stay tuned. See you soon and have fun learning permaculture.